Whenever there's a murder, it's the job of detectives to find out who the killer is and how they killed. And often, it's forensic evidence which provides the clues.
Each bit of information delivers that to the whole jigsaw.
I was able to test that sample and I got a DNA profile.
There's no doubt at all that forensics were absolutely crucial in this case.
In this series, we shine a light on how cutting-edge forensic techniques and the power of science were able to bring some of our most dangerous and despicable killers to justice.
This was such an unnatural crime.
It's not a question of if he will kill again, it's a question of when.
He believed that he was invincible and that nothing could stop him.
We'll hear how some of the toughest and most disturbing crimes were solved thanks to the tiniest fragments of evidence.
When you begin a forensic investigation, you don't know what you're going to find.
The officer plunged his hand into loose soil and actually felt cold flesh.
From the type of insects that were around, she'd been dead for at least 5 years.
And how even the most forensically aware of killers couldn't beat the experts and hide their crimes.
You know, if he comes out, heaven help somebody, because he is a dangerous, dangerous man.
In this episode, a double murder sends shockwaves through a rural community.
This just doesn't happen in quiet Wiltshire rural towns.
Disturbing details pointed towards a killer's obsession.
They weren't just knives, they were combat weapons, like a zombie apocalypse.
And the voicemails he hoped would cover his tracks.
Yes, it's me, wondering where you are. You'll be in bed, so I'll see you in the morning. Okay, love you, bye.
And a forensic discovery helps crack the case.
We made a cut through the crime scene print. There was nothing else that suggested it could have come from anybody else.
This is forensics, catching the killer.
Melksham has always been a very busy little town, and so you had a great mixture of people living there. You had people who were just ordinary working people, and then you had people who were artists and musicians and that kind of thing. It was a very mixed town, but it had a very village atmosphere. There was never any trouble there. I don't ever remember a big story breaking there.
But early on the 6th of December 2004, all that was about to change. A 999 call had come into Wiltshire Police. Its nature meant that soon after, Chief Superintendent Paul Howlett was being alerted at home.
I received the call probably about 6, 7 o'clock in the morning from a senior detective who'd been called out. When I got a phone call early in the morning, it would very rarely be good news. Once the phone goes, straight away, your senses switch on. This young man had come home from a concert in London, got home in the early hours of the morning, and found both his parents brutally murdered in the house.
The victims, a middle-aged couple identified as Milroy and Joan Clark, lived on Berryfield Park, a suburban street on a middle-class estate, with their 20-year-old son, Michael.
Immediately, this was quite a shock because this just doesn't happen in quiet Wiltshire rural towns. We don't have lots of murders, we don't have lots of violent crime. In the previous 6 months leading up to this murder, there'd only been 6 burglaries in Melksham. 6 burglaries in Melksham, all orientated towards the theft of property.
But this wasn't a burglary gone wrong. The extreme violence used suggested there was only one motive: murder. Both Joan and Milroy had been stabbed and slashed around 17 times each in identical areas on the body in a targeted, methodical attack.
The thought that someone could break into someone's home and execute these people in this fashion, that's a huge shock.
But what had made this seemingly normal couple the target of such a vicious killer?
I knew Milroy because I joined the local district council in 1999 as a parking officer. Milroy was my senior parking officer and he trained me. He was a great bloke. He was very funny, he was articulate, he was experienced in life, he had a great sense of humour.
I don't know if he was obsessive compulsive. I don't think so. I think he was just punctilious. And anybody who overparked could pretty much guarantee a ticket. And when he was seen in the marketplace, people used to scurry out and move their cars. And there was the famous occasion when he actually put a parking ticket on a box of vegetables in the marketplace. It was on market day.
Despite what people thought of him, he was well liked and well known throughout the town.
But Milroy was also a former police officer. Could a long-held grudge from his days in the force be a motive to kill him?
It's very rare in this country for people to be murdered by a complete stranger. But a double murder in this way, I think, is, certainly in Wiltshire terms, quite extraordinary.
To help them solve the case, detectives would need forensics to both identify the potential killer and place them at the scene of the crime. The report from the forensic pathologist's examination of Milroy and Jones' bodies would provide vital early clues.
Even though Mum and Dad can't talk to us, we can learn a lot from the examination of their bodies and begin to understand the nature of the attack. And that then poses the question, who had the skills to execute such an attack? The pathologist saying the wound patterns are so unique, it seems as though one person might be responsible for this attack. The National Injuries Database saying we've never seen this wound or pattern of wounds in a murder at any time before in the UK. This is unique. And it moves away from that frenzied, uncontrolled attack to something which I think is far more sinister. A premeditated execution carried out by someone who is skilled in the use of a knife or martial arts weapons.
Almost 2 decades later, lead investigator Paul has come back to the scene of the gruesome double murder.
It's certainly strange being back here after all the years that have passed. I never had any reason after the investigation to come back here to Berryfields Park. And on the face of it, it doesn't look like it's changed at all. It's a relatively remote, secluded housing estate on the outskirts of Melksham, very rural in its nature. It's a very closely geographically placed community, as well as, I would imagine, a very tight-knit community as well, so everybody knows each other. So, in those terms, the shock must have been horrendous. But from an investigative perspective, extremely helpful, because people notice what's going on around them in terms of their houses, etc. But there was absolutely nothing. No one heard a disturbance, no one saw anyone running away. There was nothing to indicate from house-to-house inquiries or to lead us to believe that anybody had heard or seen anything that could assist us with our investigation.
With no witnesses to help them, the police would have to rely heavily on forensic examination of the crime scene to provide the clues as to who killed Milroy and Joan.
I was very happy to leave the scene to be managed by the forensic experts, but of course, I wanted to go in and have a look so that I understood exactly what we were dealing with. Was there any evidence of an untidy search? Was there any evidence of a struggle? Had any property been stolen? Insofar as a crime scene, there was nothing that struck you as being immediately out of place. We realised that no property had been stolen. There was no signs of any forced entry. You know, it didn't appear that there'd been an untidy search and a burglar had been disturbed. So you're beginning to struggle to find a motivation.
With no immediate motive, Paul and his team were struggling to work out why Milroy and Joan had been targeted in such a vicious attack. Now, could forensics find the clues that would help detectives solve the crime and find the couple's killer? In December 2004, a quiet rural town in Wiltshire was grappling with the news that two respected members of the community had been brutally murdered in their own home. The shocking double murder of Milroy and Joan Clark in Melksham spread across Wiltshire and soon reached Sarah, Milroy's daughter from a previous marriage. Still shaken by the crime almost 2 decades ago, she wishes to remain anonymous.
I used to be an MDSA, which is a midday school dinner lady. And the headmistress suddenly came into the dining hall and said, "Sarah, you've got to go home to see your mum." Got to mum's, went in, there were 2 policemen there, and I had to wait for my other brother to come down. They just asked us, were we the children of Milroy, Patrick, Glenville, Clark, and they just said, "We've got some really bad news for you. Your dad's been murdered along with Joan." And it was just utter disbelief. I first thought, they've got the wrong person, because who would kill a respected man of the community?
As CSI teams continued their forensic investigations at the house, detectives focused on a reason the victims might have been singled out.
What we're dealing with here is, you know, if it is a home invasion, that of itself would be completely random. But a home invasion with this ferocity of violence is quite staggering, absolutely staggering.
And their inquiries started with those closest to Milroy and Joan.
I then had to give a very long statement going back through Dad, how he was when I was a child, what he was like, what we did, places we visited. Did I know of anybody that held any grudges against Dad? And the first thing I thought of was perhaps it's someone that Dad's helped put away being with the police, because he was in there for nearly 30 years. I then also had to prove where I was, so it wasn't me that had killed my own father and Joan.
Milroy's profession wasn't the only area of his life that made him a few enemies. His personal life was often contentious too. Sarah was just a child when she discovered that her dad was leading a secret double life.
I can remember Dad turned around to me and said the CSA were after him for payments for his other family. Dad had a relationship with Joan before my mum, and it went on all the time he was married to Mum. He somehow held down 2 families, 2 homes. When it all came out about what he was like, everyone was shocked, including his family. Because he pulled the wool over a lot of people's eyes. He was a philanderer. He liked his women. And he got away with it for years. Even with Joan, he still messed about with other women.
Could an angry husband or jilted lover have sought to take revenge on Milroy? While rumours rippled across Wiltshire, investigators turned back to the last known person to see the victims alive. Their son, Michael.
We wanted to question Michael very closely to try and understand what had happened. And at that point, he was very much a key witness because he lived with Mum and Dad, he understood their comings and goings, and he was a victim to what was a horrendous crime.
Michael gave police an account of his trip to see a concert in London on the day of the murders and described the moment he came home and discovered the horrific scene.
There's lights on in the house. He goes in the porch. The door is not locked. It's the early hours of the morning. It is odd that Father's not locked the door. He goes into the house. The television's still on. He can hear a cup going round and round and round in the microwave. There's a drink being left out, seemingly for him, on the side in the hallway. He describes it as not being flat, giving the impression that it'd been recently poured. And then, after several minutes have elapsed, he goes upstairs and describes finding his parents dead. He came out with this story which I just found really, really difficult to accept. The lights are on, the television's still on. He doesn't call out, "Mum, Dad, what's going on? Where are you? Are you okay?" No. He goes to the loo, he gets himself the drink, he drinks it. Now, people react to stress and grief in very, very different ways, but that of itself seemed to be quite strange.
With suspicions raised at Michael's odd behaviour, investigators questioned Michael further about his relationship with his parents.
Michael gave every impression of coming from a loving family. He painted this story of a loving, doting mother and father. He described his dad as being his best mate in life. So what could you possibly see wrong with this apparently ideal family?
But could they trust Michael's word? Paul and his officers dug deeper to see if there had been signs of tension between the couple and their son.
They were a good, solid unit. Dad and Joan were absolutely besotted with Michael. Michael seemed to be besotted with his mum and dad. He loved them dearly. Always gone on holiday together. They would go out together.
Muriel, I think personally, had extra special love and compassion for his son. He was constantly talking about him, constantly proud of his achievements, how well he was doing at school, and the activities that they'd done together as father and son.
He came across as very strong to me, Michael, because he'd been through a lot as a young boy. He had a difficult few younger years with his hairlift cleft palate and something with his knee as well, but Dad and Joan got him the best treatment. Dad and Joan were extremely proud of Michael. He seemed to come across as a very loving child, and he loved his parents.
Even answer phone messages recovered from the Clarks' home.
Message 5.
Appeared to support the theory that it was all happy families.
So do you reckon we'll get back, John? 2? Well, depending, it'll be around 2ish, so you'll be in bed, so I'll see you in the morning. Okay, love you, bye.
This is Michael phoning home on the way back from the Wembley concert. This message, along with a series of others recorded on the day of the murders, would help detectives construct a detailed timeline of events.
Message 1. Yesterday when I wondered if anything was wrong. Joan usually comes in Mondays, okay? Hope that everything's okay. Let her get back to me, please. Bye-bye.
So Mum was due to go to work that Monday morning to do her cleaning job, would normally arrive there at 9:30 in the morning. She didn't arrive. So the lady she does the cleaning for is just phoning up saying, "You've not turned up, I'm just hoping everything's okay." Michael left the house around about 8 o'clock in the morning. Mum doesn't turn up for work. So there is this area of specific interest within the investigation between 8 o'clock, when Michael last saw his parents alive, and the fact that Mum doesn't turn up for work.
Message 2. Hi, Dad, just me. We're all on the road, okay? Where are we, Josh? We're just in Laycock. We're on our way off home. We're off to the Lake. Yeah.
Yeah, I took me back because I thought that you said they were past Great Trowbridge. And it's nowhere near Trowbridge. John said the opposite way. All right, take it easy. Bye.
So this is Michael phoning home, explaining to Dad that they're on their way, but you can tell that Michael's chatting to his mates in the car. Is he making out he's talking to his dad? Do his friends think he's talking to his dad, or is he just leaving a message?
Message 3. Hi Joan, it's Ali, it's 10 to 4. I'm in Melksham, I just thought I'd pop round and see you, but thought I'd ring first. You're not in, never mind, I'm at Andrea's, so just pop something in a letterbox. I'll speak to you in a week, okay? Hope all is well. Bye.
So this is a family friend, and it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, or 10 to 4. So we already know that Mum didn't turn up for work at 9:30. Is it possible she decided not to go to work? Is it possible that her and Roy decided to go shopping for the day or whatever? But what we can tell from this is that at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Mum and Dad were not home. Or if they were at home, they didn't answer the telephone. So again, it gives us another point in time.
Message 5.
Hey, right, the conference just finished. We're waiting in traffic, and it was absolutely amazing. I was absolutely shattered. Are you shattered, John? Yeah, I'm fine, yeah. I'm more than shattered. I am out of it. But, yes, work tomorrow. Anyway, I'm perfectly fine, and I'll see you later. Okay, well, I will not be back till late. It'll probably be... What time do you reckon we'll get back, John? 2? Well, depending, it'll be around 2ish, so you'll be in bed, so... I'll see you in the morning. Okay, love you. Bye.
Michael wants us to believe that this is the dutiful son phoning home, checking in, letting his parents know I'm okay, and ending the message saying, I love you.
The voicemails added credence to Michael's alibi. But when detectives interviewed friends who had travelled to London with him, they crucially revealed a small window of opportunity.
This was the Blockbusters video store where John Chamberlain met Michael the day they went off to the concert in Wembley. They met here, then they went back to Berryfield Road, to the house, and there was some kerfuffle because Milroy had made of the sandwiches and he put aside these, the beer, and he told them the best way to go. And then they left, and a little way down the road, Michael says, oh, I've forgotten something. I must go back to the house. So he goes back to the house.
He said to his friend, you carry on, I'll catch up with you. And we were able to work out with hindsight that there was this 15-minute of opportunity when he was alone with his parents. Chamberlain talks about Michael phoning him saying, I'm leaving the house, and he says that Michael sounded as though he was out of breath. Was that just simply because Michael was running to catch up with him, or was it because Michael realised he had to be quick in order to try and remove him from suspicion of being responsible for the murder?
He had given himself what he thought was a cast-iron alibi. The timing was just perfect. I mean, Chamberlain had seen the parents alive. He'd been away for a very short period of time and then spent the rest of the day with other people, and then come home and found this situation.
Would just 15 minutes really be enough time for Michael to kill 2 people and clean himself up before catching back up with his friends? With no clear motive and a strong alibi, Michael Clark was still a witness rather than a suspect. But when investigators found out about one of Michael's hobbies, coupled with the forensic pathologist's report, he quickly became a person of interest.
We were to see that Michael had a vast hoard of weapons. He was an expert in martial arts, and in particular using knives within this eskrima discipline.
They weren't just knives, they were combat weapons like a zombie apocalypse. 2 walls were literally covered with them.
And it's a discipline with lots of drills, and Michael would practice these drills, clearly not on people, dummies, and we had this straw man with the wound points for the use of knives. So he clearly had the skills to be able to commit this crime.
In December 2004, police in the small Wiltshire town of Melksham were under pressure to solve the horrific murders of Milroy and Joan Clark. After initially being treated as a witness, suspicion had started to fall on 20-year-old son, Michael.
Every indication was that this was committed by someone who was expert in the use of knives. Michael had no previous convictions, there was no significant history of violence, but he did have this interest in martial arts, and therefore Michael might be responsible for this crime.
Was Michael's link with the martial arts a clue that he had killed his parents, or just an unfortunate coincidence?
Martial arts that we used to do with Mike was Genshin Jiu-Jitsu. It's more street self-defense. The skills that Mike had, if somebody else had the same skills, they'd be able to kill anybody. But with Mike, there was nothing to worry about with the kid. I'd never seen a bit of anger in the boy at all. Very loving with his mum and dad. His mum and dad invited myself and the wife and all the other black belts around for a meal. We had a lovely meal round there. It's a very friendly atmosphere. Roy was sort of life and soul of the party. Joan as well. No worries at all of his home life.
So far, forensic searches of the Clarks' home hadn't offered any hard evidence that could indicate Michael had been present at the time of the murders. There was no sign of a murder weapon or that one of Michael's knives was missing from his collection. And as he lived at the house, fingerprints and DNA couldn't be relied upon. But could another forensic discipline help detectives in their hunt for clues?
A forensic psychologist who came to the house, looked around Michael's bedroom and immediately remarked that if I was giving students an input around people who are capable of committing such a crime, he pointed to the bookshelf and said, look, here are the books on serial killers. Here are the books on police investigative procedures. He said that if this individual is responsible for this crime, it's not a question of if he will kill again, it's a question of when.
As police and forensic crime scene officers continued to scour through Milroy and Joan's house for clues, a deeper search of Michael's room piqued their interest.
Someone searching his room found a piece of paper with a drawing of a stick man, and on this were various points. And when we looked at that small hand-drawn diagram, then looked at where the wounds were on mother and father, all three were virtually identical. And that's quite chilling, isn't it? Because you've got someone who's drawn a stick man, put where they think the key points are for this attack, and then you see that in the reality of the bodies of Milroy Clark and his wife, Joan.
It wasn't the only sinister find in Michael's bedroom.
One of the most telling pieces of evidence was the fact that The police, of course, had examined Michael's computer, and on it they found that he'd been accessing the American Crime Library, and particularly looking at how the time of death is determined, and also the way that DNA is used.
Lots of people are interested in CSI. It's very, very popular. But then lots of people don't come home and find their parents have been murdered in the house.
A digital forensic examination of Michael's computer would reveal the documents had been downloaded on that machine. And there was more evidence lurking on Michael's laptop.
Michael and his friend indulged in this online chat, this fantasy about killing. If I do kill someone, it will be with emotionless calm. Was this just some indulgent fantasy game, or is this indicative of someone who presents a present continual threat to other people? So again, it just adds to this bigger picture here that's building, where there's just so many things here that make us feel uncomfortable and puts Michael in the spotlight as being a real suspect for being responsible for the murder of his parents.
Another element arousing Paul's suspicion was how Michael had acquired new clothing during his concert trip.
And Michael told this strange story about how he was in the toilet, in the cubicle, having a conversation with his friend, and somehow it ended up with his friend throwing his trainer over the cubicle. It seemed improbable. We could never say 100% it didn't happen, but it just seemed to be improbable. And then it turned out the shoes had been dumped in some skip, and that skip had been emptied. So those shoes could have been vitally important from a forensic perspective. Could there have been blood on them? But he had disposed of his shoes as well as items of clothing, and we were never able to recover them. And again, whilst that in isolation is not conclusive proof of his guilt, it adds to the overall picture that was building about the inconsistencies in his stories and the opportunities that he had had to dispose of evidence throughout the course of the day.
If Michael really was guilty of killing his parents, he had clearly planned it with precision. But years of experience told Paul and his team of officers that there's no such thing as the perfect crime. They continued to look at Milroy and Jones' home in closer detail, hoping to find something that proved their suspect had slipped up.
The forensic aspect of this investigation was challenging because Michael, as the suspect, he lives in the house. You'd expect to find his DNA there. When you looked at the crime scene, we didn't find any bloody fingerprints, shoe prints. There was nothing there that, from a forensic perspective, could take us forward. Then a breakthrough.
Leaving no stone unturned at Milroy and Jones' house, investigators used a substance called luminol around the crime scene. And soon found something shocking.
There was this use of luminol, which is a chemical, and when you apply this chemical, it causes the presence of blood to fluoresce. And when we treated the carpet with luminol, we found a bloody footprint on the carpet, a naked footprint.
Invisible to the naked eye, this was a significant discovery and tied in with a statement Michael had provided to police.
Michael came up with another strange thing where he says that when he came home, he realised his feet were sweaty, so he took his socks off and turned them inside out. Maybe it was just some random comment, but again, it was difficult behaviour to understand or comprehend from Michael in terms of what he was experiencing and the story he was telling us.
Could this bloody footprint be the vital piece of forensic evidence to prove Michael had indeed killed his mum and dad? In winter of 2004, police in the Wiltshire market town of Melksham were desperately trying to solve the shocking double murder of Milroy and Joan Clark. Strong circumstantial evidence pointed towards their 20-year-old son, Michael. And a bloody footprint found at the scene could either make or break the case against him. Police called in forensic podiatrist Dr. Wesley Vernon to examine the print.
The print that I focused on was the clearest of all. The fact that it was a walking print as well, what we would call a dynamic print. What you try and do with these pieces of evidence is create what we would call a like-for-like situation. So what I wanted to do was collect a series of prints from Michael Clark. The response to the police to this suggestion was that they were a little bit worried because they felt Michael Clark was quite a dangerous individual and they couldn't guarantee the safety of myself. But the first impressions I got of him were that he was a very unassuming, almost shy, calm, pleasant, very helpful young man. We told him what to do there, how he had to stand on the mat and transfer the print to the carpet.
Dr. Vernon then set to work comparing the footprint found at the scene with a print taken from Michael's foot.
So the images we have here on the computer, the central image was one of the luminol stained images from the crime scene. And the four surrounding images are reference footprints, which I took from Michael Clark.
Every person's foot has a unique set of ridges that make them a print unmatched by any other human being. As with fingerprints, the footprint's pattern is a unique characteristic that can pinpoint any one particular person.
So the next slide we're looking at here, the third column is headed question footprint, and those are all the measurements that I took from the footprint at the scene of crime. The second column relates to the known footprint, that is a footprint that I took from Michael Clark, and we're comparing these two different measurements together. And with the exception of the fifth toe, everyone fell definitely within plus or minus 5 millimetres. One of the measurements was absolutely identical. We made a cut through the crime scene print, a cut through this particular reference print in exactly the same position and lined them up. And this showed that wherever they were matched together, the distances and similarities of features are very similar. The image at the crime scene and the image of the footprint taken from Michael Clark were extremely closely matched. There was nothing else that suggested it could have come from anybody else.
Dr. Vernon's examination of the footprint gave detectives the scientific evidence to charge Michael with double murder. But despite all the evidence against him, Michael maintained his innocence and divided the small community that knew him.
Mike, our liaison officer, came out and said we've actually charged Michael now with the murder of Dad and Joan. My first thought was, that's preposterous, that's stupid, because Dad and Joan doted on Michael and I thought he doted on them. It never passed my mind that Michael could have done this. And it just didn't seem right that a child that had wanted for nothing, that was growing into a lovely young man, had suddenly turned on his own parents. Because Michael was my half-brother, I had to support him.
When he was actually charged, that did come as a shock, and I'm sure everybody would have been shocked. And the immediate thought was, oh, they must have got it wrong. They must have got it wrong. They're just sort of going for the first person to be standing around.
With many in Melksham still believing he was wrongly accused, Michael Clarke's fate came down to the trial. And it was at this point where many of his supporters realised that Michael wasn't all he seemed to be.
We were given the option of actually going down every day to see the trial so I could make up my own mind on the evidence, if Michael was innocent or guilty. And when the Crown prosecution put forward the evidence on Michael, that was when I made my mind up that he was guilty. And it was like he was there enacting a role. He came across, when he was speaking to the jury, as very cocky. It just wasn't Michael. It was like a totally different person, someone that had changed overnight. From the lovable Michael that we all loved and adored to this person before us that had killed Dad and Joan. You could see he was listening to the evidence or the defence that was coming through, and he'd be smiling or he'd be shrugging his shoulders, like he was getting away with it. This was not my brother that I grew up to know. This was some evil person that tried to beat the system.
In February 2006, the jury found Michael guilty of 2 counts of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 28 years.
On the face of it, you have the boy next door, a humble, quiet lad dedicated to his martial arts who dotes over his parents. Then you have the young man who indulges in these fantasies online about killing. I thought Wiltshire was now a safer place that he is behind bars.
But years later, many still find it hard to accept that the shy boy they knew was capable of hurting anybody, let alone his adoring parents.
I think about Mike quite often. He just loved his mum and dad so much, I couldn't understand why they put this murder rap on him. And some of the other things that came out afterwards, I mean, the amount of mess in the house, and they didn't find a spot of blood on him, it just didn't make sense. So that, to me, that should tell me there was somebody else out there then that was there. If Mike was released, he can come around my house anytime he wants.
There are a lot of people out there who still think Michael's innocent, but a year after Michael was found guilty and sent to prison, I actually got a letter from him. In a way, he did say he was guilty. I think he tried to say that he would let me know why he did it. I am still waiting 17 years down the line for it. I've been put through hell, my family's been put through hell. There's all these what ifs and whys and why did he do this? But only Michael knows. And then you just think he was very clever. He nearly got away with it. But thank God for the forensic evidence that, in the end, brought him down.